All right, I'll get us started. Welcome everybody to the November 11th, 2020 Octant Community Meeting. Today we are going to be discussing the 016.2 update, an Electron update. We'll have a demo of the Dropdown component, and then for the Q&A today, there's quite a bit of stuff that I've added around RBAC and access control and like what Octant should do and look like and feel like when operating in restricted RBAC environments. So with that, I will start with the 016.2 update. So we created a branch in the upstream that is 016.2, and we started to cherry pick over some of the issues that we highlighted last week that were part of the 016.2 milestone. I think I have a link to those somewhere, maybe. Well, you know what? Here, I'll just go to anything over on that GitHub page, and then I'll go to issues and milestones. This should take us, there we go. Okay. So those ones that are in the open right there, they won't be making it into this release. But what we did get in was the log sanitization, XML tags being removed. We also got the, oh, that one there is that 1335. Ignore that one. That's not actually part of this. That was for the new navigation stuff. We're working on getting the forms update that Sam worked on, cherry picked over. I think it sounded like there was maybe some conflicts due to some commit creep in the merge, but we're getting those addressed. And Milan brought over the updated ingress host being a link. I was also able to get the work from Scott Andrews to fix our NPM. It's a recurring problem we have with our NPM package where internally we have our own NPM repo, and if you're on the VPN, things will kind of automatically flip over to use that when you do like NPM installs, and it'll update the package file and the package lock file, and it's very easy to miss if you're connected to the VPN and you test things and everything just works. So the action item for that is we're actually going to add a GitHub action to check if this build artifactory text exists anywhere in the project, and if it does, just it fails the check because it shouldn't exist anywhere. And then we've got the WebSocket error causing a crash. That's going to be in there. The ALB ingress with a bad link, that'll be in there. And the application page failing to render if there is no metrics endpoint. This was something that Scott opened up. Scott Andrews, he opened this up when, if you have a custom metric server configured and it is not available, instead of just kind of like failing and rendering out the application grid, it will just spam errors and not render anything. So the main thing here is the 1508. I think that was one that Scott Andrews was specifically wanting for the Knative plugin for doing some creates on the form there, and that'll be in this. So the stuff that didn't make it, at least into 016.2, doesn't mean we won't do a 16.3 depending on how long 0.17 takes, but these things are currently being worked on, which is creating some form of initialization state for plugins so that they can fetch the current namespace and the set of labels and filters that are being applied. Right now, this is less of a problem on the Go plugin side, right? Because those are loaded at runtime, and to load a new version of it, you have to restart Octant, so it gets kind of all that initial state. But for the JavaScript plugins, which can be reloaded dynamically, when they reload, they didn't receive the initial namespace event and all of the like events that get fired off when Octant first starts. So on that reload, so it's basically making sure that during that reload cycle, they receive all of the events that they normally receive during the startup cycle, and then also expanding that a little bit so that they can just go fetch them from the dashboard client kind of any time they might want to make sure they're operating with those latest assumptions. Like, do I have the latest set of labels and filters, and am I on the latest namespace and using the like all of the current state that can be managed by the user, just making sure you're up to date there. So that's kind of where we're sitting with 016.2 is those fixes will be coming. We'll be cutting a release for that today. We'll get this last bit of things cherry picked over. We'll do some testing, make sure everything is working, building, compiling right, make sure across all of our platforms. One of the things that I think got us last time was, not last time, time before. There was one time where there was everything looked right, and then we released the binaries, and they just on every yeah, Sam's 2 releases ago it was. So yeah, avoid that. So that is it for 016.2. Is there anything I missed that we're pulling over that isn't captured here? I know, Sam, you were looking at some various things.
Yeah, this looks right. I think one of the biggest issues right now with cherry picking is that it's completely my fault, but I bundled in a lot of the new scroll bar changes with the Karma test fixes, and that is starting to become a pain. So I think we'll probably have to make a PR directly into the 16.2 branch. I think the cleanest way to do this is just to cherry pick the things we need, and then we would just have one fix for the Karma tests. So then we're just not trying to resolve, like, nitpick through a bunch of code for cherry pick or for merge conflicts.
Okay. Yeah. So essentially cherry pick what we can, and then just have to port over basically backport the Karma stuff. Okay. Yep, that works. All right. Moving on from that, let's make sure I didn't miss any questions. Oh, just hello, Pablo, who's watching from Argentina. Thanks for joining us. Electron update. So this one is, this one's it's going. Sam and I have made some good progress on this. The last thing we were doing was getting like that basic Electron builder working, and then starting to bring pieces of Octant into it. The first one is done. We've got a good Electron builder working, at least under Linux. I haven't tested it personally on any other platforms yet, but it creates a app image under Linux, and that thing executes, and it starts up what would be the Octant server, and then it also loads in what would be the Octant front end as a renderer, like a local load file local renderer. So it's moving away from that model where there's like a web server embedded. It's just now there's just the Octant server, and then you have Electron doing native rendering of our single page, Angular app. So the demo repo that Sam set up, we got that process working in there. And I have slowly been kind of pecking away at like, okay, what is moving these things in? What is either taking what we learned from this setting up this repo and bringing that over into Octant currently, and changing the way we build it there, or vice versa, like figuring out what's the easy path to get these pieces building and serving up Octant. Right now, I'm leaning towards taking what we've created in this Angular demo repo and just kind of taking that build file and the Electron builder JSON and the package JSONs and like moving them into Octant and just pecking away at the errors that kind of surface as we try to use it as the builder. The way we currently build Electron in Octant now is there's like a whole separate ASCII Electron Go wrapper around the whole thing, and it builds it as this Go binary that then embeds all of the Electron into it, and then is essentially like building a launcher around Electron, but with embedded Go. And this is just building a native Electron asset that embeds an Octant binary into its app ASAR. I think that's right. ASAR. There's like a bundle that contains all of the. It's like a file system, a portable file system that contains all the contents of the Angular application or Electron application, and so we package the Octant binary that runs the server into that, and then we use a child process to spawn it during the startup phase of Octant, and then Electron then renders the view, the Angular content. So that's where that's at. Anything to add there, Sam? Anything that I missed that I didn't cover?
I added a link in the Zoom chat. Maybe I should do it in the agenda as well. Just a link to the Angular demo repo that is that we've been working on, and it just takes the Angular, the auto-generated example Angular application, and we just shove that into Electron and have it talking to a Go process. So that proof of concept is really what we're using the base off of a lot of the work we're doing here. So if there's any general public interest in what we're doing, or just if people want to chime in as to see if they have a different opinion on how it should be done, the repo's there, and yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out there. And no one on this team right now is an Electron expert. We're spinning up as we can. So if you have expertise in this area and you want to get involved or contribute or add really anything, please reach out and do that. That would be great. I don't know that we've done a good job of curating issues around this to say like, here's a good starting point. So it would have to be a little more synchronous to get involved, but you can reach out through the Slack channel or just search for Electron in the issues. And I think we have, I believe it's called Project Polychrome is the epic, which is the technically the code name for Electron. Because code names are fun. That's all. That's the only reason. It's another form of a mountain. We have a lot of mountain code names embedded in this source. So Polychrome is another one.
Never too many mountains.
Too many mountains. Lots of them. What was I doing? I was doing anyway. I don't remember. So since I don't remember what I was about to do, I'll just go back to this and say, yes, Electron, it's coming. We're working on it. If you have expertise, please help. Milan, did you want to do? I believe this is from you. A demo.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Basically, we have a new component, and let me share the screen so I can show that. It's this one. You see my screen?
Yep.
All right. Yes. So we added a new component. It is a drop-down component, and it's based on Clarity drop-down component. So it's exposing pretty much all Clarity drop-down component properties. Not all, but most of them, and most of those that we think at this point will be useful. So I'll just give a quick walk through and to start off, there are different ways you can invoke the drop-down, and based on that, I kind of divided the docs. You can have a button that will invoke the drop-down, and then all the items will be inside. And as you can see, you can have headers, separators, just the plain labels, or links inside the dropdown. So dropdown items can have different types, as well as the source of the dropdown, which in this case is a button. That can also be a label. If it's a label, it looks a little different, but behavior is exactly the same. And also you can have a link at the very top. This is a little tricky because clicking on link will still follow that link, and only clicking on the drop down of the down arrow will open that drop down. And in addition to that, you can also have the icon, which is useful sometimes and fully supported by Clarity. So, so in that sense, those are the different ways to use this component. Also, one thing I wanted to mention, let me go here to Canvas and show some of the properties. You can see how you specify all the items. And some of the properties are, they can be, changed directly. I can, for example, instead of having this to be, sorry for that, just updated me. Instead of button, this can be, let's say, link. And you can see that the drop-down changed the type right away. And there's this additional property, use selection. What that means is basically if, as I change the items here, the source text will change to that very item. So for example, let's go to, let's say, label. And, oh, sorry, this is a little slow on my machine today. Yeah, you can see that title specifies the source text, and if it's an icon, that will specify the icon name. So if I set this to true now and go back here, as I change thanks, you'll see that the source text is changed. And if I go back, it will just hold the original text. Also, those can be items can be links. So in essence, this can be like almost like standalone applies component that's used for navigation, and that's exactly how we plan to use it. For example, in our breadcrumbs. So the second stage of implementation, which I just started working on yesterday, will actually convert those breadcrumbs into dropdowns. So when you click on this, it will show all the available items, from cron jobs all the way to stateful sets inside the dropdown, with pods being selected and so on. So that's coming up. Going back to dropdown. So this is now, as you can see, it's already available on our reference.octant dev and our reference site, and it is a part of nightly builds. But there might be a few changes based on phase 2, a few changes in interface. I hope nothing major, but just keep an eye on that in case you plan to use this component. I think that's all I got. I hope I didn't forget something.
Is there, thank you. That was great. The question I have is on the items themselves, is the title that can, like in this case with the label drop down, that title item that controls the first one that you see, and then the use selection being true. I guess what I'm wondering is, like in the case where they have this drop down is linked to an action, and they're going to say select apple, and so then you're displaying the apples. They would, the plugin author in this case is going to have to render the title as apple, right? And then so that when the page redraws, it shows it as being selected, because the component itself is actually going to go away.
Right. So component selection defines the current selection, right? I'm sorry. Component title defines the current selection.
Okay.
So initially, it's going to be favorite fruit, but you can set it basically to. So in this case, I have, let's say I set that to fig. I never tested this. So now if I open it, oh, I expected, oh, I guess the case was incorrect. Expected fig to be selected. It's now, I assume that selection is working based on the name. So yeah, so that is a little problematic. That's a good point. Have to find a way to make that working. I'll probably run into that when I implement the drop downs here. So that's probably gonna happen in phase 2. Good point.
Yeah, or I guess it doesn't necessarily need to be smart about it. It could just be it either needs to be well documented that like how to use this component, right? Like what the expectations are. So we could say, you know, when you like the
Right.
title is the current selected thing, and then the items are the options that you can select. And then when you select pair and it triggers your action, you would then redraw this component with the title of pair, and then apple fig and the other one would be in your items, right? So like,
Right.
so it could be one of those where it's up to you as the author to remove items that shouldn't be in the list when the context has changed, because the whole point of a dropdown is that it is a context changer, right?
Right. Right. Oh, provides a quick selection.
Yeah.
One of many items. Cool. Yeah, that's all I got. Any other questions?
The demo didn't go into this part, but can you show or at least talk about actions for dropdown?
Right. So yeah, we have a dropdown has a action that associated with it that you can specify when you create a dropdown, and then I don't have it set here, but so once you specify that, whenever the selection changes, that action will be invoked, so it can be handled on the back end and to perform different action.
Okay, and so the dropdown itself gets an action handler, and then the item that you select is what gets sent as the payload for the action.
As a payload, exactly. Okay. Yes. So payload will contain both identification for this dropdown, because you can have multiple dropdowns on the same page. So it will identify uniquely the dropdown, but based on the provided name, and then it will identify the item the same way.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't have any other questions.
Sweet. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Let's see. Well, the agenda back up here. And all right, into the Q&A. So this was something. So I had mentioned last week that I was working on a has access check that kind of would go through and pull all of the access for your user, and just like this was part of replacing our existing has access. So the way we do has access checks now is it's embedded down in the actual object store. So it's injected into the object store, but it has become part of its actual list, get, and watch calls, which is not great. Those should not care. Those should be just, they should do what they're supposed to do, which is make an API call to list some objects and return an error if there's an error. The class of that error, the type, doesn't matter, right? This thing should list objects and return errors, and that's it. And right now it attempts to list objects, potentially backs off, returns empty responses, also returns errors. Like it was really the implementation that I initially did solved the problem, but it wasn't a good solution like as a whole. It kind of papered over a hole in the wall instead of actually fixing the hole first. So revisiting that, I was taking this approach of kind of using subject access reviews. So creating a subject access review request, getting back that response from the server, and then using that to then inform and populate an access cache, and then allowing that access cache to sit over the object store. So instead of being inside the object store, the access cache itself has a set of methods that you can then say, hey, do I have access to perform this verb against this resource? And it's not making an API call. It's not doing anything. It's an in-memory cache that has been informed by the subject access review. And what I was doing with that is basically using that to essentially replace all of our existing has access. So as a sidebar to that, I started looking at this issue, which is a really old one from Alex Brand 139, which was a desire to surface all of the RBAC permissions equivalent to running like kubectl auth CANI. And then there's some other tools out there like RBAC View, RBAC, and Raxus, anyway, that do this type of work. And so what I did was I took the subject access information that I just had built in a cache and was like, okay, what does that look like if I stick it into a table? Well, what it ends up looking like is 310 items, one for cluster scoped resources, and then one for the current namespace, which in the case of someone who's like a cluster admin will likely be overlapping. So I was like, well, I could merge these two data sets together, and then, the scope on the right-hand side in that column could be a separated list of like, you have access to this in the cluster, comma, the namespace or whatever. But then it got me thinking, what is the benefit of essentially, and this was a question that I put here in the issue so that Alex, who originally opened this, could respond, but also just trying to get some feedback from the community at large is like, why do you want to see the RBAC for your currently logged in account? And then the second piece is like, is this more useful as a tool to explore RBAC of other accounts? Like if there was a drop down there with the list of all the service accounts and you selected one, and then we created a subject access review and then showed you everything that account can do, that generally seems like more useful than just like, what can I currently do? So anyway, because this table, like this is not very useful, right? Just like, here's the 310 resources, cluster scoped, namespace scoped, and here's all of your permissions to them. It's like, even with filtering, it's kind of and maybe this is because I'm a cluster admin in this case, but it does seem like it's not that's a lot of data that doesn't seem super helpful. But maybe I'm not fully, maybe I just don't understand what the desire is to view these things and ways that it is useful to view that information. So putting that question out there for folks. Yeah.
I think that having it on for other users would be much more useful, because at least from my experience, I'm using Octant as also someone who usually has cluster admin on the cluster, being able to debug also why a specific user doesn't have access or what he has or what service accounts do have access, would be very beneficial. Seeing my own access, less so, but my user could also be in the drop-down list for other users as well. So attacking the being able to select a user would suffice for both use cases. I think of both seeing your own and seeing what another service account or user would have access to.
Oh yeah, thank you, Scott. That's a good point. Just like implementing that feature in and of itself kind of solves the question of, is this useful for my user or more broadly for other users?
And the default could be my user, and then it would just have a drop down of the other users that you could select if you wanted to see anyone else.
Yep. Yeah.
Yes, so there seems to be like two ways to look at this, right? You have one from like the cluster admin view. You're like, one of my users can't access something, which you just talked about. And the other one is, I am a person with restricted access and I can't access this thing. Why not? And so going from the other end, it would also be like, I think they might not necessarily see the drop down, but it would be helpful to show even like on a lower level what they can or can't do. Like for example, like a given action, right? Like if they, like let's say they can't delete a specific resource, this could potentially give a little bit of insight to like why a particular action might be failing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, I think that's good feedback. Targeting is like that kind of in between of like, yeah, it's really not to see what your cluster admin account can do because you already know it can do everything. It's more of like auditing or verifying like, hey, why can't I see deployments? Am I crazy? And then you go in and it's like, oh, I don't have access to see deployments. And then why can't my service account do this thing I expected it to be able to do? Oh, because it doesn't have access to that custom resource.
Yeah, I also wanted to amplify that that this is pretty important, I think, and especially as we move into multi-user and cluster usage and things like that. So it would be good to have ability to see this. And I like the idea to have a drop down there and see it for all the users. I think it can probably be useful for troubleshooting some permission issues and things like that.
Cool. Yeah. So if there's nothing that people want to add onto that, I'm going to move on to the next one, which is the one that I added as well. This one is, so I'm working, as I mentioned, I'm working on this has access, subject access review refactoring, and I'm running into this kind of question about how do we handle resource versions. And specifically what I mean is, for example, if Octant is doing some lookup, we have a set of GPKs that we've defined within Octant, and we're looking up resources based on that. And it's like V1 beta 1, right? And then the cluster you're on is a newer cluster, which has the latest version of that resource, and it's been upgraded, and now it's V1. The API, the Kubernetes API will degrade gracefully when you make that call and you say, hey, I want this version of that thing. You'll get the, as long as it's within that window, you'll get the old version without the new fields that the new version contains. It knows how to downgrade. The problem is that when you do a subject access review and you say, hey, give me all the stuff that the cluster that I have access to in the cluster, what the cluster is going to return back is it's going to say you have access to resource V1. So in Octant, when we go to then access resource V1 beta 1, we don't actually, in this scenario where we've cached the result of the subject access review, right? We've used that to inform what we have access to in the cluster. The GVR for the resource doesn't match up. So there is no V1 beta 1 in the subject access review list, even though that's what Octant is currently pinned to, because we're using, like, that was the version when we added that resource in. And so I'm really curious what if anyone knows of better ways to deal with this. If we just check for, if we drop version off initially and say like, okay, do we have access to the group and the resource, and then we do some type of I don't know, guessing at version, but that seems like not what we want to do at all. So I don't know. This one's kind of gotten me hung up a little bit because it's like something that's currently like in Octant now as the one is like our mutating webhooks, right? Like if you, I think right now we're pinned to V1 beta 1 so that the listing of webhooks works with old clusters, but also new clusters, because the API will kind of do that for us. If we switch that to V1, then old clusters, it doesn't list. So we either have to start to have we have to maintain multiple versions of everything, right? And we say, here's V1 beta 1 and V1, and this is what we support. Or we just say, we're going to look those, look up the GVKs from the cluster API. So we're always using the server version instead of having versions hard-coded into Octant.
So what are the downsides of supporting multiple?
Just maintaining that list of multiple things. And other than that, there's really not a downside to it. Like we obviously our renderers, like our the things that we use to generate the I guess that would be generators. Our generators would only, even if you had V1 installed, we're only going to generate with the data that we know is in like the beta version, right? And that's what we do now. That's why we say, hey, just use the beta version, because it has all of the info that, like, it has everything V1 has everything we need, and we just won't show some of the new stuff. But yeah, the only downside is just maintaining both of those things in the code.
I don't know how it works, but at least specifically for, I think, is it mutating webhooks?
Yeah,
I remember, okay. Yeah, because working on, I remember like horizontal pod autoscalers a while back ago, they had a similar issue where they were switching between two different versions, but they do an internal conversion somewhere. And I've never tried to see if you can actually compare objects based on using that internal conversion to see if they were equivalent or not. But if that exists, that could be one way to do it. Although that would seem a little heavy-handed, because then you kind of have to do it for like everything that is in between two versions that you want to maintain. The other way I can think of is if we look at something like gvk.go. Currently, right now, like all of the GVKs are kind of some. I think they're just hard coded into just a huge long supported list. And what we could do instead is turn this into a map, and we can just hot swap things as they go. Granted, I think this is only for the overview module, but I think that's, strictly speaking, that's what we're talking about here. So it wouldn't really matter for other modules. So this could be a map, and then we could just have our internal thing of saying like what's supported, and maybe we can like even add like a feature like make some of these toggle away if maybe it just doesn't work, so we don't have to keep spamming something if it doesn't work. Like, I don't know. Let me try to think of like a better way to explain. Like maybe like if we had like a back off and it backs up for a really long time after like a certain amount of tries, we can just remove it from this list altogether.
Or
until the next restart. Yeah. And it just gives us more flexibility too. Like I could see like a world where this just even becomes configurable altogether. Like you could load up Octant omitting some certain GVKs if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Yeah, I pulled it up here. This is the file you're talking about, Sam, right? The gvk.go, yeah. And you can see like, yeah, we've got like the mutating webhook configuration is the one that I just ran into, where it's like my cluster is running V1. The one we have pinned to is V1 beta 1. So my subject access review says I can't access V1 beta 1 because that's not even installed in my cluster. But the API, like the Kubernetes API, when I make a request and say, give me V1 beta 1, it goes, oh, okay, you can make that request because V1 implements V1 beta 1. So here's your response as V1 beta 1. At least that's my understanding of what's happening. So Yeah, making it a map seems like that would potentially work.
Yeah, I like that idea too. Just hope it won't introduce too much complexity.
Yeah, the nice thing about it now is that they're, well, I guess, yeah, I think they could just still be, well, yeah, the nice thing is that they're schema.group version kinds, which is native to the rest of the code. So making it a map would mean we would have to do some extra parsing of it, right? Like, I wonder if we could just do it as a Anyway, I don't know. I don't have an answer. We have to think on it. Okay. This ties into another question around the same refactoring of this area of code. The previously, so like if you're calling list or get or watch and that's succeeding, and then all of a sudden it fails with unauthorized. So it's not some transport error. It's like you got an unauthorized response back from the Kubernetes server. So your credentials, whatever client we're using, has expired and is no longer functioning. Backing off and retrying is like generally useless. Like that's what we do now. And most of the time there is some user intervention that is needed anyway to make Octant recover in a way that it can start seeing the cluster. And this is usually like reloading some context and reloading the kube config, something like that. So I guess what I'm wondering is like, if a previously succeeding call like list get watch fails with unauthorized, what should we do? Should we bail out to the config loader screen? Should we, put in a mechanism where we can actually stop the content streamer and put a error alert across the top and, say, do something? Should Octant stop? Should like I these are just not necessarily good ideas. They're just ideas. But I think there's a case where we are doing work, we go to unauthorized because of rotations or time, like just short-lived cluster clients, and now we need to do something.
I mean, the easiest thing would be just to delegate decision to end user, just to show the some kind of abort, retry, exit notification, but it's probably not the best case. I think I'm leaning towards just the first solution, just fail out and show the error and because if you do that, you can still do the other two. You can manually start the Octant, then you can manually retry.
Yeah, similar line of thought. Like not necessarily stop Octant, but stop polling. So the user still sees what they see. They can still navigate their screen, but Octant will not update in real time until maybe there could be a button that could do a manual refresh at some point, but to re-enable polling.
All right.
Like a disconnected state or something like that.
Yeah. So content. So I don't know if we can do this now or not. I'd actually have to go explore the code a little bit. But general idea is like we're doing some API calls. We get back an unauthorized response. This then generates the type of error that we catch in our, because we have a loop that is watching for errors. We catch that access error and we say, okay, we got an access error from the API where we weren't getting that before. Let's go ahead and stop the content streamer, put a alert on the page, and then maybe have a disconnected state modal that is or an overlay of some type, maybe not a modal, but maybe a modal because it's actionable, and say Octant has, during the list we got unauthorized response. Here's the error that we got from the API server. Do you want to, retry, exit, or reload from do you just want to blanket retry? Do you want to reload your kube config, or do you want to exit Octant? That seems like the three things, right?
Yeah, that sounds right. I'd probably say modal might be a little heavy-handed. It could still be something like watch unexpectedly fails for whatever reason while the user's looking at something, and all of a sudden things are gone, right? But core mechanism is still the same. I think the nuance here is that we don't want to block the user from seeing whatever they are currently looking at.
Okay. So okay. All right. So, okay. I'm saying okay a lot because I'm thinking as I try to talk these words out. In the header, we have the standard, you are connected to the cluster, you're not connected to the cluster, right? And so then we do an alert that says hey, something bad happened. You're we perceive that you are no longer connected to the cluster. And then that broken connection thing that's no longer green, it's red and it's broken, and when you hover it says not connected, right? You click that, and then inside that is either that's what pops a modal, or that's what gives you the options to retry, reload, or basically retry or reload. If you want to exit, you just exit.
Right, or you can just have a reload, tiny reload icon by that indication. I mean, something like your connection is broken or whatever, indication plus on the side refresh icon, something like that.
But what would the refresh? So in that case, because the options are to refresh, what would that do? Would that reload the kube config and then retry the server, or would it just retry the server? Or
well, we can have both if you feel that's that's what we should offer. It's kind of hard to explain to user what exactly those mean, I feel. Maybe something like reconnect and reload. Yeah, not sure.
I just wanted to say, I know it's kind of hard to talk out how the visuals might look, but if we can actually go through Figma and kind of do a low fidelity prototype and talk about the languaging behind that, and how we might want the buttons to look and what information we want to display, then share that out.
Yeah, that'd be excellent.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer that, and we can share it out later.
Cool. So that's what we'll do with that. We'll get a mock-up that shows what Octant in a disconnected state looks like, how we'll prompt a user to deal with that disconnected state, and I think that'll generally be a better experience for people than what we try to do now.
Yeah, I like that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, one of the things that this would also fix is there's actually an open issue for it. It's the inconsistent behavior that plugin authors currently experience when they're making dashboard client calls, because the first time you call list, you'll get an error back saying it's unauthorized. And then the second time you call list will be in the back off state So it'll respond to you with an empty list to avoid spamming errors. And it's like, so then you're in this toggled state where the actual API is inconsistent, and it's not good. It's real bad. So we want to get that fixed. This is part of refactoring this all to get that fixed. That was an issue that was raised by Scott Andrews when he was working on the Knative plugin as well, was that inconsistent behavior. So he was trying to show a not found page, but then it would toggle to an empty table page because we were giving an empty list and an error to basically signal the back off state. Like, yeah, it's not good. Okay. Was there anything that people wanted to add before we are done? All right. Well, as always, thank you everyone for attending, and really appreciate all the conversations and feedback. So thank you, and we will see you next week.